I'm Jay Sekulow, co-hosting with my good friend, the former mayor of the great city of New York, Mayor Rudy Giuliani. But for today's purposes, more importantly, I will say, former U.S. attorney, former senior member of the United States Department of Justice, and my colleague and co-counsel in a fairly important case, a very important case, that's going on right now. And he is our co-host today, and we're both co-hosting for Sean. Mayor, I want to talk to you about an issue that you and I are dealing with, and we'll start this and let you pontificate some here because I think this is important. You and I have handled a lot of media over the last couple of days on the issue of what everybody wants to talk about. And by the way, if you want to talk about it, you can call us at 800-941-7326 or 800-941-SEAN. And that is the issue of a presidential interview. And there's a lot of issues that go into that, Rudy, and a lot of discussion that takes place, and a lot of legal analysis. Let's kind of get everybody up to speed on where we are.
So there are two things you have to deal with, as you know, Jay, because we deal with it every day. One is just the normal representation of a person who is in some way under investigation, although they're very fudgy about what it's about. So far, no crime suggested. And he has rights, and they have to be protected. Second, he's the President of the United States. So he has prerogatives that have to be protected, not just for him, but for future presidents. So it's very, very complicated. And we also have a client who wants to be heard.
Yep.
He has felt from the very beginning, and he's right, he's done nothing wrong, that he should be able to tell his story, and they should believe him. On the other hand, he also knows that he doesn't exactly have an unbiased group of people. They have
That's a problem.
Indicated to us, even in our discussions, a preference for Comey, a preference for some of these other people. The whole root of the investigation is corrupt. The going back to the dossier and Strzok, people who hate him, a counterintelligence investigation that I can't figure out how they ever did it. FISA wires that somebody should get prosecuted for perjury in getting them. All of that taints the investigation. So we have a lot to consider. You know,
I said from the outset that the corruption started this investigation, actually. If you look at the beginning of the investigation, the inception of the investigation, the corruption ran very deep, and then it continued to permeate. And if you just go through what I call the parade of horribles, I mean, just look at the issues. This is, you and I keep calling this an irregular investigation. Well, and that's being kind, actually. That's being courteous. Because look at the irregularity. It starts with the dossier that even James Comey admits is salacious and unverified. We now find out that the author of that was Christopher Steele, who just happened to be hired by Fusion GPS, who happened to be hired by the Clinton campaign, who was working with Bruce Orr, the number 4 at the United States Department of Justice wife, Nellie Orr. She was working for Fusion GPS and just happened to be working on the putting together the dossier. Now, okay, you could not make that up, except then it gets better. And that is you have the lead investigator and the conversations he had with Lisa Page, and you got the whole Strzok-Page incident. Then you got the insurance policy with Andy McCabe. We must get in. What's the insurance policy? Now, a lot of the people that were at the FBI are now gone that were involved in this. But the truth is that Peter Strzok, the agent, Rudy, was the lead investigator for the special counsel's office. And I keep talking about what happened to that evidence that they gathered, even though he was, they'll say, well, he was subsequently fired. True. But what happened to that evidence that he gathered during that year and a half he was on the investigation, because he predates the actual Mueller appointment? And we talk about in the law the fruit of the poisonous tree, but it's serious. When you can't even, the irregularities here are so in-depth, it's really hard to put your head around it.
I would describe this as an investigation born in corruption. A corrupt dossier that is crying out for a real investigation. If you're talking about collusion to effect an investigation, paying a foreigner, as Hillary did, to produce a false dossier on Donald Trump is so far the biggest crime that's been committed with regard to the election. That is provable. And then that dossier is used as the basis for the wiretaps, the FISA wires, and then when they know it's false, they don't correct it. They go back to the judge and they keep repeating it. Now, some judge has got to be going out of his mind, even worse than Judge Ellis, because that judge was made a fool of. And the FISA process was completely made a mockery of by this false dossier. So it spawns an investigation. The investigation produces no evidence of anything involving President Trump and Russians. And somehow Comey comes along and makes it into a criminal investigation.
And now we know that the criminal investigation itself, of course, we also have to put in there that James Comey said that he created this memo after his meeting with the president, leaked it to the press for the sole appointment of getting a special counsel, which was miraculously appointed. Now, could you imagine, and you were a U.S. attorney, Rudy, and you were also a high-ranking Justice Department official. I worked for Treasury at the beginning of my legal career. Could you imagine if an IRS agent or an FBI agent were to release their 302 form to the press? What would happen to those agents?
Well, those who have been indicted and prosecuted and convicted. It's a crime to do it. And in this particular case, it wasn't accidental. This was a planned, completely thought out, corrupt scheme on the part of Comey. So it didn't come from him. It came from this professor. I mean, imagine the skullduggery of this man. And then he wants us to believe that the memo is accurate about the Flynn conversation. He wants us to believe that at the time of the Flynn conversation, he felt that he was being obstructed. However, he never told anybody about it. He never reported it. If he didn't report it, it's misprision of a felony, because as a FBI director, he had to report it. He testifies under oath after it, and before he releases the memo, that he had not been obstructed in any way. You can have Jarrett on later, Greg Jarrett. He says, it's not happened in my experience. Under oath.
Right.
He's now contradicting that. In other words, he lied under oath. So they want this guy to be the arbiter of truth, and they're not investigating him for his crimes? I mean, this is really corrupt.
Now, supposedly there's an office...
Where's Sessions?
Yeah, well, there's the Inspector General's report that is supposedly coming involving James Comey. We haven't seen it yet, and I'm hearing, and you're hearing the same things. We're hearing, September, October. So that may come out. We'll see. The last one was pretty tough on Andrew McCabe. Interestingly, he's no longer with the Department of Justice. James Comey's no longer with the Department of Justice. Rybicki's no longer with the Department of Justice.
So Comey wants us to believe...
Peter Strzok. Yeah, I mean, you get there's been quite a Lisa Page, all gone. Yeah.
Comey wants us to believe that Trump had this conversation with him about Flynn, that he felt that it was an obstruction of justice, a serious federal felony, but he never reported it, never told McCabe about it, because McCabe also testified that there was no obstruction, as he did, and that he testified falsely under oath. I mean, he can't be obstructed 3 months later. He can't remember the conversation 3 months later and say, oh, my God, he tried to obstruct me. I mean, this is so phony. If it weren't for the fact that the president has these CNN and MSNBC and all these people that are just dying to interpret everything against him, people would be demanding an investigation of Comey.
You know, it's interesting because if you look at this film, we're going to talk with, you mentioned Greg Jarrett, our friend Greg Jarrett's got a great book out, by the way, The Russian Hoax. Everybody needs to be reading it. It's a great, great book.
I'm underlining it.
I bet you are.
And I'll report.
And I got an early copy. So we all have. Let me say that we're going to get into that with Greg. I want to talk about a lot of that because it's important. But, people need to understand also that we are trying to handle, and you understand this, you've got competing interests when you talk about an interview. So the question of the day is the interview of the president. Will the president submit to an interview? And I want to be very clear on this. We have raised, and have raised this really since the beginning of my representation, which is going back over a year now, that there are significant Article 2 issues. I mean, really significant Article 2 issues. Do you think a U.S. attorney, for instance, should be able to subpoena a president of the United States to discuss the reason why he made a policy move or a decision to fire a subordinate? If that's the case, well, then why couldn't every U.S. attorney in every district who has a beef with a particular president start issuing subpoenas? And that the president, instead of running the government, ends up responding to subpoenas. That's not the way it's supposed to be. Our founders knew that, and that's why they have political process in there. It's not a legal process. There's not going to be a trial here. But people have to understand that we have to go through a real process of analysis in coming to these conclusions, Rudy, about what our recommendation is regarding an interview. Obviously, when the special counsel sent us the last proposal, obviously we didn't accept it. So we counter. We're not going to get into the contents of that counter. That wouldn't be appropriate. But there's a lot of factors that go into this.
There are a lot of factors go into it, and not the least of which is you have to evaluate the good faith of the people who are seeking to question him. Do you really have a chance of persuading them? Or have they made up their minds already, and they're just trying to set him up? A great example, we talk about Flynn, is Flynn. The President of the United States says he never had that conversation with Comey. Comey says that he did. You know, both of us would be perfectly comfortable if he had the conversation.
Right.
He said nothing wrong. He didn't say you must drop the case, which you could do. He said you should think about it. You should give him a break, which many people have said to me when I was a prosecutor. We know Comey didn't think of it as obstruction because he would have reported it. So we have a very good defense on the facts. But the fact is the president insists, I never had that conversation. So now we put him in front of Mueller. Mueller asks him that question. He says, no, I didn't have the conversation. And then they say, oh, we believe the liar Comey. Now, here we're almost at a disadvantage because there's no trial. They'd never charge him in an indictment with it because Comey couldn't withstand cross-examination.
Absolutely correct.
He gave a prior statement under oath contrary to that.
All right, we're going to be back with a lot more. I'm Jay Sekulow in with Rudy Giuliani. We are hosting for Sean Hannity. He's taking a break for one day. They gave him a day off. Linda gave him a day off.
Him.
Yeah, we do. We're going to take calls also at 800-941-7326. That's 800-941-SEAN. And there is a lot to talk about as we discuss not just the issues of what's facing the country and the president. We're going to talk a little bit when we come back about some strategy. Sometimes it's important to deal with strategy, and let me tell you something. The mayor and I are doing a lot of strategizing, a lot of strategery.
Right,
now. Yeah, no, a lot.
President Bush.
Yeah, just to reflect on another president. Because look, I mean, again, as we've been talking to you, there's a lot goes into a decision about allowing a president to be interviewed, and we're going to talk more about that. Welcome back to the Sean Hannity Show. I'm Jay Sekulow, Chief Counsel of the American Center for Law and Justice, Counsel for the President of the United States. With me co-hosting is Mayor Rudy Giuliani. More important, former U.S. Attorney Rudy Giuliani and Senior Justice Department official. There's something that, Rudy, and we've got a lot more coming up.
Something we really want to.
But there's something we want to get to, and I think it's important for people to understand this. As the decisions are made on interviews or not, we've told you what our inclination is, and that is, we don't think they've met, at this point, the threshold at all. And I think constitutionally they don't have the right to interview in the first place. There are a lot of other factors that go into this. But there's something that we do need to get very clear, Rudy.
I think what we have to get clear is the fact that a lot of people interpret it this way. Well, if he's telling the truth, why wouldn't he just go in and testify? Hey, welcome to the real world. The fact is, he is telling the truth. He has done nothing wrong. All of these months and months, all these people going after him, they haven't suggested one thing he did wrong. Not a single thing. No crime, no unethical conduct. The reason we have to worry about it is, one, we're giving away prerogatives of the president.
And the presidency.
And the president and his own counsel have to be heard on that.
Yep.
Second, we're walking him into a possible perjury trap, not because he isn't telling the truth, but because somebody else isn't telling the truth, who they would credit, namely Comey. So if he says, I never had the conversation with Flynn, and they elect to believe Comey, they can write down, we believe he committed perjury. And now we have walked him into that.
Even though it's one person's word against another person's word, and one's got a memo and one said it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Here's the problem with all. Let's be just blunt. Here's the problem with all this. Why would you do this? Why would you submit any client, let alone the President of the United States, to this kind of situation? But when you add to it the presidency of the United States, and it's not just, by the way, about this president. It's about future presidents, because what we decide and what we recommend to President Trump impacts future presidencies.
Absolutely right.
And that's where the Article 2 and the Constitution are so critical here. And I don't think we can ignore that for one single moment. I think we do that at our own peril.
I think that's right. And if we have to contest it and fight it, we have a good chance of winning it.
I believe so.
And vindicating the presidency. The reality is, I will say this over and over again, if this were just simply, can he go in and tell the truth? Of course he can. He's got nothing to hide. We have stipulated with them. We are willing to stipulate with them what he's going to say. They know what he's going to say.
Well, we produced millions of pages of documents, 32 witnesses. It's been the most transparent inquiry of this type when involving the office of the presidency in history. No one's done it like this. Having said that, there are also threshold constitutional standards that have not been met in our view at this point, and that certainly raise not only serious legal arguments, but I think puts the onus not on us, quite frankly. And I don't believe a court. I hope we don't have to go that route. We might not have to. If we do, we do. I don't think the Supreme Court of the United States would say the president could be compelled to testify with regard to actions he took within his constitutional authority. That would set a horrible precedent. Back with more in a moment.